I do think it's a bit uncommon. And I think there are several reasons why it happened and why I came to Casbis. And I think the first one is the fact that the School of Architecture in my university, Chinese University of Hong Kong, is actually in the Faculty of Social Science. So this is a rarity in Asia. It happens around the world, but I think we're the only School of Architecture in Asia that is in the Faculty of Social Science. So that brings a whole different discipline. Our focus is social engagement. And so when I came to Casbis, the one thing that really attracted me to come here was, and I told the director, Sarah Soul, was the B. For me, the B means behavior, but what it means is it's how people engage with their built environment. So that was key. And then you ask the question, is it interdisciplinary? Well, it's a great question because it makes me think about what inter means. I'm very interested in the inter, not the disciplinary. I think the disciplinary, we know that at Casbis we have anthropologists, economists, and all different disciplines. But the inter for me means between, but even better, it means among people. And so what I do is I try to take architecture away from the conventional notion. So if you've seen monographs of architecture, what do modernists do and still do today? No pictures of people. The inhabitation of a space is seen as a pollution of the space. And so what I want to do, and what we're trying to do in my lab, what we're trying to do in writing the book here, is to take that notion that people are connected to architecture. People are about architecture. And so that's how we set out. And the interdisciplinary is interdisciplinary in the fact that I'm talking to other people, but I'm learning how, let's say, for example, a sociologist relates to people. And it's different. It's looking at ethnicity. It's looking at how you can detect how people behave through surveys. I'm looking at how they interact with space. So it is fundamentally based on interdisciplinarity. And one of the things that I think is nice about this collaboration is that people expect things. So people expect that you write a book. So, you know, when you make the proposal, you come to Casbis, you make a proposal. My book proposal was architecture with people. But what happened is that as you write in the chapters, new things arise. And one of the things that arose was this collaboration that my lab is designing a project in Kibera. This is in Nairobi, in Kenya. And so I present the project to fellows, and then all of a sudden I get input from sociologists. And there's a sociologist looking at disability and access. And all of a sudden, what is the psychological effect of not being able to access a building? And therefore, the building that we design incorporates his take on what a totally accessible building could be. So there's a kind of osmosis going on at Casbis that is kind of, in my opinion, takes interdisciplinarity into another level. And I think one of the things related to this interdisciplinarity is the issue of how we observe. So one of the great things I learned here was how anthropologists observe. And so if you, for example, an architect would always put the architecture in the foreground. Now, speaking to anthropologists, they put people in the foreground and architecture in the background. So I'd like to show you an image that I think is really important, and is the picture of the bridge. Now, what's interesting about this bridge, it's a Dong minority bridge in China where I work. And what's incredibly interesting is you see that people are in the foreground and they inhabit the space, and the architecture becomes background. And now this is a fundamental message, and I think, of how we can socially engage with architecture, because they inhabit the space, they become the space, and all of a sudden the architecture, which is a kind of a bridge, enables this meeting, this habitation. I mean, to even a lack of a better word, even the dwelling of people on a bridge happens through the architecture, but the architecture is not in the foreground. I think to sort of answer that question, I've got to go back a little bit. So I come to academia after 15 years of practice. So I work in practice. I'm devoted to working in projects around the world, in seeing how architecture gets built. And then all of a sudden I realized that, you know, I don't want to work for a commercial office. I want to go into academia, but still practice. As I enter, there's a kind of a golden rule that people tell you. You've got to separate these three aspects of your job. One is teaching, the other one is research, and the other one is practice. And that comes to me as a kind of like an element that really doesn't make sense to me. And so what I try to do is I try to connect them. So if you can imagine like it's a bar and you divide that bar into 3 parts, usually what people do is they sort of connect them at the edges. So teaching is slightly connected to research, and research is slightly connected to practice. And what I try to do, and this is something that really came out and sort of theorizing it here in Caspers, is I try to sort of wrap them. And you can imagine that I'm trying to make a cinnamon roll. And so I wrap all those 3 so that teaching is in constant contact with research. Research is in constant contact with practice. And therefore you get this reciprocity between the 2. Now, what happens in practice is that, for example, all my teaching is outside of the classroom. And therefore my research is outside of the classroom. So I go and on the field, we then try to listen. And the social impact comes, in my opinion, comes because we're engaging with people. We don't go to places and give solutions. We go there and take a slow kind of approach. We listen. And the first thing that you've got to do when you're working in the field, in my opinion, is gain the trust of the community. And so you've got to do a workshop and go back again, gain their trust, show that you're committed to the project. And so then the impact happens on the level that you're able to listen. So I'll give you an example. When we go there, because we're with students, this is completely different than if you were going to with a sort of a private practice, because there's a relationship between the student, the university student, the undergraduate student, and the local villager. So after a while, we live in their houses. There's a sort of empathy that starts to happen, and you kind of listen to their problems. And you understand that, you know, everybody needs a better house, everybody needs kind of a washing machine, everyone, and then you say, well, you know, that's not really our role. We can't fix individual problems. What are the sort of more macro scale problems? And they say, well, unanimously, they all agree it's children. Better education for our children. And therefore you understand that if you were to provide a library for these people, and this is one of the things that we've learned, and maybe the project that I'm most proud of is the library that we did in Pingtang. The library at Pingtang is interesting because rural education in China is very rigid. It's following a strict curriculum. Now, and when you work in rural villages, one of the things that we can't do is we can't work at all with educational programs. That's not allowed. But what we can do is work in third spaces. So we invented the idea of a library, but the library is a different library because it's a library where you learn by playing. So imagine that you're in a classroom and you're learning maths and arithmetics and Chinese language, and then after school you can go into a place where you can read a book, but you can also run around. You can play hide and seek and you can do a drawing. There's no places where you can sit down, and so you're encouraged to play. And all of a sudden, again, this word that I've kind of learned at Caspers is osmosis starts to happen. You're playing and you're learning. I think it's an important question of how we address the issue of heritage, and I think there's a lot of confusion between these 2 words, heritage and preservation. And we kind of think in order for heritage to be alive, you've got to preserve it. Now I'll give you an example. In these villages, there are villages that you can imagine, they're rural villages in mountainous areas of China, Hunan. The Dong minority people are a minority of about 4 to 5 million people that live in this area. And the villages are always connected to a river and have been practically autonomous for over 400 years. Now in the last 30 to 20 years, this has changed. Now what happens is that it's not a change which is kind of gradual. It's a change that is kind of in a way violent. I say violent in the fact that it's like, you can imagine that you've been building with a single material. Every building that they have, whether it's a community building or a house, is built in timber. You plant the timber when your firstborn is born, your firstborn boy. You go out into the forest, you plant it, and then eventually when he reaches 18, the tree is felled and you build a house for him. So there's a whole ritual within the village and within their culture. And now, all of a sudden, there's a new material that bypasses this, which is called concrete. And a lot of what happens in China is that as soon as one person builds a concrete house, then they realize, oh, all of a sudden we have running water, all of a sudden we can have different spans, we can have bigger spaces, and the environment changes. So our take on heritage is that you've got to work with these materials. So if timber has developed over 400 years, we've got to slowly enable concrete to come in and to work as a hybrid together. We're not saying that you deny concrete. But we've got to work together. And so one of the things that we've noticed is that many people build new houses in concrete and then feel very uncomfortable. And so they feel uncomfortable because they don't have a sense of belonging, but most importantly because the building can't breathe. It's a different type of building, right? It's a very hermetic building. And therefore, what we try and do is we go back always to the DNA, look at the frame and see what elements, for example, the flooring. Flooring could still be timber and the structure could still be concrete. So on that level, we try to work with heritage rather than preserve heritage. This also falls back to what I mentioned before of the idea of living heritage, right? So this is something that is kept alive. We work a lot with craftspeople, carpenters, and we try to understand their craft. And what's beautiful is that Dong architecture is very humble, but yet it's very complicated to put together. All the elements are prefabricated. And the opposite, for example, of a Japanese building where all the joints are expressed, in this Dong Chinese architecture, all the joints are hidden. And therefore you need to work with a carpenter to understand that heritage of how the joints work and how the buildings are built. So for example, if you see the building, you think, this is erected in a certain way. No, it's erected according to very important philosophical, nearly cosmological laws. They follow Feng Shui laws, they follow cosmological thinking in the fact that you can only build in certain periods. So what I'm trying to say is that heritage is not simply a physical, it's both tangible and intangible. And I think it's by living in the village that you can connect to that heritage. Conditions, in a way, is at the core of what we do and is also in the name of our lab. As a verb, it means to condition something, to change something, to apply something. So this notion that you look at something and then you change it. Our approach to design and to change is more not in terms of starting from a tabula rasa and then going in and making something new, but there's always calibrating. So you have to look and you have to observe and you have to kind of really understand before you change anything. So that's why I think, yes, conditions are really important. The second point relates to a little bit of the methodology that you ask. And, I was thinking about this for a long time. And as I was here, as I was writing the book, which is basically the theory for the work, I came across the work of a British anthropologist called Tim Ingold. And his idea related to anthropology is that to teach anthropology is to practice it. And then he goes on in the same quote, he says, to practice anthropology is to teach it. So there's this vice versa between teaching and practicing. And in my opinion, in the condition lab, in the work that we do, it's very much the same thing. You could take away anthropology and use the word architecture. In order to teach architecture, you have to practice it. And to practice architecture, you have to teach it. So that's fundamental. And so I think it was, now I've been teaching at CUHK for 10 years. And I realized that something radical had to change in architectural education. So I set up to change the curriculum that every class that I teach is outside the classroom. Now you can imagine that's not easy because it means insurances, it means risks, students going out or students building things. But if students don't connect and don't feel the material, don't feel the person who they're building for, there's a disconnection. And therefore I think a lot of architecture, and I don't know if this applies to other disciplines, is treated in the realm of the abstract. and therefore you're building spaces in abstract, but you're never talking to the people who are going to live in them. So we do the opposite. We talk to the people and we listen to that. As soon as I arrived to Hong Kong, I went on a trip, on a heritage trip of minority villages in China. And I was speaking to a professor, Professor Ling Kai, who was recording and surveying all these villages in China. And yet she recorded them, had beautiful drawings and books, but yet these villages were dying at an unprecedented rate. So the question was, yes, we can record them, yes, we have the data, but if we don't actually do something, they're going to disappear. And there's a famous statistic that more than 300 villages a week are dying. Dying means disappearing in China. So it's a very active problem. So what we did is we engaged directly. And the program that you talk about and going and taking CUHK students is actually living in the field work. So the course that I run every summer is literally a month. We live a month, 50 students, 40 to 50 students live, and through living we understand. And there's no student that can make any kind of project without asking and speaking. Now, the type of projects we do are also interesting. We frame them under the word prototype. So prototype means something that you sort of make and pre-test before you put it out. And for us, a prototype is a little bit different. It's a building, something that is built that has to have a one-to-one dimension. Means that if you're making a chair, if you're making a table like this, you make it and then you use it with the community to see if it works or it doesn't. So we started off with some very small public space temporary buildings made by students. Then went on. These are one-to-one buildings built by students with local carpenters that cost, you know, it's incredible. They cost 50,000 Hong Kong dollars. So the power that a student can have with talking to a carpenter, listening to the community, engaging with the community, and then building a one-to-one prototype, right? And this was something that then radically changed the way that we do research. I think it's the reason why CASBIS let me come here, because it's a different type of research. It's the research that is applied, and it involves different aspects of the research program. It's not just simply a project that is kind of born from an idea and then implemented and then you go away. It's built with the community, and then you go back and you understand how the community engage with it and you learn from it. And so the next project that we do incorporates all the lessons that we've learned from the first project. So the people is actually a very sort of diverse range of people. So it's first and foremost is my role as a teacher. I believe in teaching, and I believe that there's a very important role, especially as an architect, to teach the young generation. And so I live in Hong Kong, and our school is committed to social engagement. So a lot of the students that we have want to have that kind of exposure to helping the community. So the first people are the students. And now, if I were to tell you that I'm teaching a class where I have undergraduates that are 19 years old, I have master students that are 25 years old, and I have PhD students that are 35 years old. So I'm teaching a kind of a spectrum. The second kind of people are also students, but these are the students that usually use the libraries. So these are children that have very little amenities. They usually don't have books. They have their grandparents that raise their grandchildren in a certain way. And so, for example, they're not aware of the dependency or the addiction of a phone. So all the kids have a phone, but the grandparents don't think this is any harm. So children are all day on a phone, or they're playing video games in like small video rooms. And so what we try to do, the people are the children to which we build libraries for. And then there are stories that you engage with these people. So I've told you before in the previous questions about engaging with students. Now let me tell you how you engage with the local students. And so you present the project and you ask the students what they would like, the children who are in the school. And they say they all want a building that looks like their traditional Dong house. And I say, well, The issue of a traditional dong house is that it's going to be very dark and it has no stairs and it's very difficult to. But they say, no, that's what we want. So we say, okay, so we work with that. So that's what we work with. And then one of the girls says, actually, we have a dream. The dream is that we want a building without a door. And so all of a sudden the people, the children, are expressing how they want the designs to sort of translate. And so you can imagine as an architect to design a building that doesn't have a door is very difficult. So then we designed this building that has a staircase that comes down like a little bit like a tongue coming down, and there is no door. But then you think about what that does to the general public. That means that this building belongs to the whole community. It's a building that you can't lock at night. And all of a sudden, the people become the community. The building is kind of learns from that. Architecture has this sense of empowerment. You can empower communities. And I think if architects go back to looking at empowering, and if architects have this ability to be humble and to listen, then architecture can change.